Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
The number one problem salespeople make is they don't talk about the customer's problems. They end up talking about their benefits or their features. So we always have to start with finding an expensive problem.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
My name is Josh Braun. I help people sell things, and you can learn more about how I do that at salesdna.co.
On this episode with Josh, we're diving into how to sell to the C-suite. Josh gives a very literal example of how he got a meeting and sold to Geico, clearly a huge organization, by cold contacting the CEO of the company. This is part one of a two-part conversation, and so with that, let's jump right in. So let me start by asking you this, we don't need to go into the process just yet, but just as an overview, how different is it getting a meeting with someone in the C-suite versus getting a meeting with a kind of middle manager or a buyer in that kind of sector?
It's a great question. And I think the question we need to ask is, how can you help someone kick more ass, right? So we have to start with, how are you going to help the company do something better? By way of example, let's say there's an elderly gentleman in a car and he's having trouble getting out of the car by himself. His knees hurt, his wrist hurt. He's having a hard time getting out of the car by himself. He's not independent. He needs someone's help. He doesn't feel good about that. If you can help him kick more ass, that would mean that you could help him get out of the car in an independent way. That's an infomercial for something called the car cane. So everything starts with an idea that you have, a problem that you can solve that's going to help someone do something better. Now, the next thing we have to decide is, who's that person that we can help do something better? That could be the C-level suite person, which we're going to talk about today, but it could be something else. It's a long-winded way, Will, of saying the goal isn't to talk to a C-level executive. The goal is to first find out how you can help a company kick more ass, and we'll talk about this specifically for how I did this with Geico. And then we find the person who's struggling the most with that problem, the old person trying to get out of the car.
Because it seems like the conventional wisdom is we go as high up the food chain as we possibly can and then get knocked down, if appropriate. And my experience, that perhaps isn't always the best way to go about it. Why is that the conventional wisdom versus going in and helping the person that needs the help?
Yeah, so I think the reason is people don't understand the jobs that people are trying to get done, which I learned when I was over at Basecamp. So everyone has a job that they're trying to get done, and everyone is struggling sometimes to be able to make progress on that job. And unless you can find the person that's having the struggle, and that struggle is high, people aren't going to care, right? So for instance, Will, if I were to contact you, one of the things I could guess that you're struggling with is to get more advertisers on your show. And if I had a way for you to get an advertiser on your show that you hadn't thought of before, that's a struggle that you probably have. That's what I call a big problem, not just any problem, that would probably capture your interest. The idea isn't to get to the C-level executive. I think why people do that is they try to get a referral so that the C-level executive says, hey, John said to speak to Mary. But if you're solving an expensive problem for someone that has the struggle, and nowadays we have the tools to zero in on the person having the struggle, we don't need to do that because that person will want to talk to us because they want to get out of the car by themselves. They want to be more awesome independently, right? Infomercials are great at this, right? Hey, have you ever gone to a mechanic to get an oil change, but realized that the mechanic told you needed a new transmission and didn't know whether to believe him? If I'm struggling with that, if I've ever had that happen to me, I'm going to say, yeah, like you're calling me, I'm a triathlete. If you learned about me and you said, hey, Josh, I noticed you're 49 years old and you're trying to do an Ironman. Would you be interested in an idea to help you train for that in 10 hours a week rather than 50? That's something I'm struggling with as a 50-year-old Jewish guy trying to cross a finish line. So we can identify the struggle. It's about getting to the person, and that may or may not be the C-level executive.
Okay, so if we accept that, but we want to steer the conversation towards the C-level executive for this conversation, so we make some kind of assumption for the audience that they are getting in front of the right people by getting in front of the C-level. Otherwise, the conversation could go anywhere, right? So we made that assumption. What problems does someone in the C-suite have? And maybe we can break it up into the main sections of it, of finance or management and kind of human resources or whatever it is. What problems do each of these have that we can potentially tie our product to, if appropriate?
Well, I can't tell you how smart you are. So this is
I don't know about
the number one problem salespeople make is they don't talk about the customer's problems. They end up talking about their benefits or their features, right? So just a quick sidebar. If I sell a product called Unshrink It, and Unshrink It is actually a product that unshrinks wool sweaters if you accidentally put it in the dryer. And I were to cold call you and say, hey, have you ever had a wool sweater in the dryer that you shrunk accidentally? If I didn't have a wool sweater, if that wasn't a problem for me, the solution has no inherent value. So we always have to start with finding an expensive problem. And so let's be real practical with specifically the CEO that I found, which was Tony Nicely over at Geico. This is back in 2006. So this was before Sales Navigator. We didn't have a lot of intelligence. So my hypothesis for the problem was, how does Geico make money? And what's the most expensive problem they have? And so when I went on geico.com, the one thing they want you to do when you go on geico.com, even today, is do what?
Not sure. Sign up to something.
Yeah, get a quote.
Buy
auto insurance. And so my hypothesis was, what if I can get more people to buy auto insurance in a meaningful way? That was the problem. And so I went through the quote process myself because I was in the market for car insurance. And I noticed that during the process of getting the quote process, there were some problems I was running into. The coverage was confusing, the insurance jargon. And I hypothesized that if I could make that clearer in a better way and more interesting for people and less confusing, that more people would go through it. So that was the hypothesis that I had. And I said, hey, Tony Nicely is at the top of the food chain. He's the CEO. He reports right into Warren Buffett, I believe. And he's going to be the person that I think is going to have the most struggle and is going to be the most interested in this problem. So that's how I started. That's the first step of the process, which is find the expensive problem. In this case, the insurance quote process. Could I get more people through it? And then find the person, in this case, Tony Nicely, who I think is struggling with that and could be benefit if I was able to crack it for him.
The answer to this might be the fact that you've used the word expensive about 15 times there very purposefully. But how do we know whether in that scenario, Josh, whether we need to go after the CEO of the company or whether we need to go after the UX or user experience designer? How do we differentiate, I guess, the value of the problem that we're solving?
Yeah, so we take a look at the profile of the person that we're reaching out to. And we take a look at, for instance, with Tony Nicely, I knew that he was interested in growth and he was interested specifically in...
And how did you know he's interested in growth? I mean, that's an obvious thing, but...
Yeah, I read the annual report and I saw some things in the annual report that alluded to them wanting to, spend money and invest in online growth, specifically Geico.com, and they sell auto insurance. And so I inferred for that since that was in his annual report, that is something that was, top of mind for him. Now, whether or not I was going to end up working with him, probably he was going to introduce me to someone. As we get into the story, we'll kind of show you how that unfolded. But I thought he would be the person that would be most interested. The other thing that I look for is we're not prospecting a company. We're prospecting a person. And that guy's personality, when I saw him speak, vibed to me like he would be interested in new and innovative ideas, which as we get further in the story, we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of that. And his personality also vibed like it would gel with our approach. He was a little friendly. He was not so buttoned up. It looked like he had a little bit of a sense of humor, even some of the things that he was saying. So I look for that as well, especially now when I do outreach, is does the personality vibe with our company and me? When I do my outreach, will they click? And so not just about what they're responsible for, but also can I glean anything from who they are as a person?
Let me ask you this, Josh, and then I'll ask you about specifically the outreach that you did, and we'll continue down the funnel of the story. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway to kind of prove potentially make a point. What percentage chance do you think there is of getting in touch with a CEO when you read the annual report? You know that they're focused on online growth. You know the personality type somewhat. You can cater your customized email to that, and you spend 2 days doing that for one person. What's the chances of success there versus the chances of success of spending the same amount of time, the same amount of energy, spamming 50 CEOs with the same bullshit templated email, trying to get, especially in the C-suite here, not just anyone who's kind of bored, sat at a computer who might pick up a phone to you, but someone who's incredibly busy and important. Where does the biggest chance of success lie on kind of either side of that?
Yeah, you're bringing up a good point. And so the other thing we're going to talk about is it's not enough to do all the things we just said. You actually now have to communicate the idea in a way that I call has clarity and charm. So you have to communicate this idea in a very different way that actually makes people feel something. So it's not enough to send an email template. My take on this is you're going to send fewer emails, but the response rates are going to be really high because we're going to make a really good first impression. Now, Will, you told me before the show, you get 300 or 400 people emailing you every month to be able to be on this show. Somehow, this little old Jewish guy in Boca Raton managed to break through, and we could talk about how, but I would imagine it's because, well, actually, you tell me. Do you even remember? I don't even know if you remember how I even got on your radar. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it'd be interesting to just hear your perspective there.
So you got on our radar through our producer. So our producer, I literally, I've not got it in front of me. I literally have notes, and everyone who kind of emails or that we reach out to, she goes and does a little bit of research on them, and then she kind of formulates a potential 2 or 3 topics. Then I ask yourself for potential topics as well. Then we combine it all, and that's how the show comes about. And one of the things that I remember her saying in this kind of back and forth document that we have is she really enjoyed your energy. She really enjoyed. She must have seen whether you put video content or podcast content, whatever it is. She was like. The line was essentially really good energy will make a great guest kind of regardless of subject, because some guests will only cover a very narrow niche sliver of a subject because you go out of the bounds with those individuals and it just turns into a complete shit show. With you, essentially what you're saying was you could probably jump on the phone with him and have a good chat about anything, which is how things are going so far, right?
And that's exactly it. So in addition to the stuff that we talked about, you have to be able to communicate in a way that makes people feel that. Right. And we'll talk about that as we get into the tactics. But whenever I communicate and do outreach, I always do something to make people feel a certain way. So for instance, with you and your producer, I was sending you a customized URL with your name in it in your LinkedIn Messenger. And when you clicked it, it came to a page of me saying all the reasons why you should have me on your show and how it's going to benefit people. And I used humor and I used jokes and I was sending you I was doing things to make you feel something, as your producer said, the energy. Mm-hmm. I call it, having a little charm, having a little delight, but making people feel something. And we'll talk a lot about this. There's a gentleman I know. I'll give him a quick shout out. His name is Dale Dupree. This guy sells copy machines. It's one of the most commoditized things that you could ever imagine. But this guy has branded himself the copier warrior. And he goes in slaying copy machines if they're spewing ink or jamming up or you have long customer support calls. And he rescues you from the tyranny. He sends a sponge that looks like a red brick in the mail. And says, if you've ever wanted to throw a brick at your copy machine because it was jamming up, don't do that. Throw this instead and give me a call. That's an example of a first touch that's going to make people feel something, so that when you cold call and say, I'm the one that thought it was a good idea to send you the brick in the mail, you're just going to get a visceral reaction. And you can hear this over and over again on my webpage. I have audio files of people and email responses where there's what I call not an open rate, not a response rate, what I call an oomph rate. This reaction and this energy and this that was awesome, man. Even when they say no, it's like, this was the best email I've gotten all week because it made me feel something. And when you make people feel good, they want to be around you. Another quick sidebar, and we'll get back to the process. I always wore colorful socks at every discovery meeting I went to. And I always sat purposefully so people could see them. And they would always comment on them. And it was a thing that I was known for. And it would always make people feel good and smile and ask me about. Literally a year ago, one of my clients that I sold 6 years ago, had a work anniversary. And I just shot him off, happy anniversary. He sent me back an email or a thing on LinkedIn saying, hey, nice to hear from you, Josh. Are you still wearing those colorful socks? I don't remember what I sold him. He probably doesn't remember what I sold him, but he remembers how I made him feel. And this is super important when we're doing outreach. It's not enough that we have value propositions that we can help people. We got to get that feeling across, and we got to pay more attention to the first impression, which we'll talk a little bit about when we get through this thing.
Okay. Well, with that, Josh, what was the first impression? How did you make it? Was it kind of an email chain like you sent to us, to me? Was it LinkedIn? Was it email? Was it a call? How did you kind of get your foot in the door?
Yeah, so all those things are mediums and they could all be great, but really it's the execution of what you're doing. So let's actually talk about this in regards to Geico, and then you can see how this works. So step number 1 is we're going to find the expensive problem. Step number 2, we're finding the person with the struggle that has that problem. And step number 3 is we're going to form a hypothesis as to how we can potentially solve that problem. So for instance, with Geico, we noticed that on the fourth screen, somebody had to select their coverage options. And there was like 7 things to choose from. And there was all sorts of complicated car insurance lingo. And our hypothesis was if we could simplify that, less people will be confused, because when you're confused, you leave and shut off. So that was our step 3. Step number 4 is a biggie. Step number 4 is called teaching somebody a new idea that they have never thought of before that can help them make progress. The biggest problem people make when they cold email is they tell people things they already know. So if I told Geico, you guys are losing people during your auto quote process, they'd be like, we know that. But we didn't do that. Instead, what we did is we took a look at that specific screen and we said, we are hypothesizing that you're losing people on this screen because they are confused by all the choices. What we've done is we've got started and we've mocked up a new design for you, a new experience for this flow. Here's a link to the video that'll walk you through it. If you like it, let us know. We can continue talking. So instead of telling them what we were going to do about our idea, instead of saying we can help you increase your conversion rates, which is what pretty much every other email probably would have done, we got busy and we actually did the work. We actually gave them a taste, and this was a different redesigned UI UX experience using a voice and conversational language and clarity to clean it up and make it more fun and clear and understandable for people. And we sent that little 3 or 4 minute clip. And this is how the idea was, teach them something new. So for your business, Will, if I was trying to get a sponsor, let's say I wanted to get
let me
Geico.
give you a better example. So sponsorships kind of wrapped up now. We get more people asking for podcast advertising space than what we can provide. And I pride myself on being a salesperson and testing what we talk about on the show in real life. So this is a problem. So one way I'm thinking about trying to solve this problem and to have a product to sell B2B is I'm thinking about twisting the content in the sales school and making either a new version of it or rebranding it slightly to be more corporate friendly and selling it to sales management. So we can perhaps use that as an example of how I would get how I'd add value to a sales manager, sales leader before kind of pitching the sales school, perhaps.
Yeah, you do the work, right? When I ran an agency, one of the things that the founder was really big on is we'll just get started doing the work. Like we'll just do the front page. We'll do some of the work. Like we'll give the person the free cookie sample because it's so much more powerful to do and to give away something for free, quote unquote, than it is to talk about it. Oftentimes, when we would go to finalist presentations, we would do this, right? So everyone's coming and doing the final pitch, and we would walk in and say, hey, we could do that, or we can get started right now, and you can see what it's like to work with us. And we'll just get started on the project. And we would just kind of kick things off, and they'd get a little taste of what it was like to work with us, and we would be able to unseat a lot of big agencies. And we were just a small little 8-person agency out of Chicago. I'm using that approach because people like it when you make them smarter, when you are the one to teach them. It's why chefs are so great, right? The chef will be on the show, Mario Batali. He'll teach you all his recipes, and you'll be like, that guy's awesome. And then when I'm in the store, I'm going to buy the cookware because he made me smarter. You know, you're the same way. Like I listen to Will, and if Will has something to sell, I'm going to buy it because Will made me smarter. How can you make your prospects smarter in a new way, not an old way? And how can you show that rather than tell about it?
So would an example of this then be to demonstrate new versus old way of doing things? Perhaps an old way would be to give the sales leader a free trial or whatever of the product. Perhaps a new way would be to give one of the team full access to it for however amount of time, record how much they're using it or whatever, and then report that back to the sales leader. Would that be kind of a better approach to it?
Yeah, I love it. And I was thinking about your business as well. I didn't know you were so inundated with people that want to advertise in your show. But let's say that you weren't, and you wanted, let's say, Geico or this big sponsor on. One way to do this is, hey, you're going to create their ad, their 45-second spot. You're going to produce it, and you're going to send it to them, and you're going to say, you want to air this? Like, it's already done. They're seeing what it's like. They're hearing the Will thing, the promotion, and like that's like, wow, that's crack. When the company that I worked for was courting me, Jellyvision in Chicago, they were trying to bid on our project, and we had other agencies bidding and sending us proposals. What Harry did, the founder of the company, is he sent us some of the project. It was a 2-minute clip of this is what it's going to look like to work with us, and he sent it to us, and that thing went viral inside the company. Those guys were 25 or 30% more, but we felt something because it was work. And when you see the work, it's just better than talking about it because, again, to our earlier point, it makes you feel something. So with this Geico example, we did a video teardown. Here's where we think the problem is and why. Here's our unique perspective. And here's the after, just like the car cane commercial, right? Having trouble getting out of the car? Need to use your hand? Need someone to help you stand up? That's what we did with Geico. And here's the car cane. Here's our perspective. Here's a taste of it. We've got more. If you're interested, let us know.
So how do we get that taste into someone's mouth? As a terrible metaphor or simile or whatever it's called, analogy. How do we get it into someone's hands when they're incredibly busy? Perhaps there's gatekeepers. Perhaps they don't check their own email. Perhaps they're kind of fortified. If you wanted to, I'm sure we'll go down the story of Geico here, but if you wanted to get in front of that CEO face to face, or however to imprint this messaging to share this with them, how do we go about doing it?
Well, let's talk about it, right? So let's talk about different approaches with regards to gatekeepers, which are not something you want to get around. So we'll talk about that in a second. But let's actually talk through the specific example for Geico, which maybe worked and maybe didn't work today because there wasn't as much email being sent back in the day. There weren't these auto-sequencing tools. I had to do things manually and follow up manually, so not as many people were doing it. But let me just tell you how I did it. I actually have the specific email right in front of me. And there's got some things in there that I think are good takeaways. So the first thing is we have to have empathy at the beginning of the email. And so what do I mean by that? We have to understand that the person that we're emailing has got a lot of stuff going on. Tony Nicely has a lot of stuff going on. And we have to be empathetic about that and honest. So this is how the email would start. Tony, you probably get tons of email from people that you don't know, and you're seconds away from deleting this. But 5 minutes could get you 5% more customers. Now, that little saying is a playoff of the Geico tagline, which is 15 minutes could save you more than 15%. So what I'm doing there with that empathy is I'm saying to him in a very honest way, hey, dude, I know you're busy. You have no idea who I am. You probably want to delete this, but just give me 2 seconds, give me 5 minutes to tell you why I think it's worth your time. And so what that does is it's like, hey, you get me. Rather than just starting your pitch, which I was on your site, notice this thing. Other things that I've done is, hey, Will, you don't know me. I was browsing LinkedIn and found your profile after searching for this term. Congratulations on being the chosen one. You win. Yeah. I got your email address from a LinkedIn Chrome extension. Things that are just like honest and brutal and empathetic and real, like really, really real. So that's how I would start all of those. With regards to gatekeepers, it's really interesting. And I learned this valuable lesson at my local seafood market. Actually, I went in there to buy a piece of swordfish, and this guy came out and spent 20 minutes with me teaching me how to prepare it. Gave me spices. And the experience was so great. I said, can I speak to your boss? And he was like, oh my God, am I in trouble? He's like, no, I just want to tell him what a great job he did. And I complimented him in front of his boss. And this guy, every time I walked into the store, I would always get cool stuff from him. Spices, the best fish, something from the back. And I realized that acknowledgement means a lot to people. So with gatekeepers, I always have every opportunity to say to the gatekeeper, when I write an email to the CEO, your gatekeeper who I interacted with was extremely helpful. You should definitely give her a raise. She should probably have a bigger office than you. And I would compliment the gatekeeper on what she did and what she's doing because they like to be acknowledged, especially because that's always the case. So I never try to get around a gatekeeper. I always try to acknowledge a gatekeeper, even in the outreach.
What is the ask in the email? Is it always a phone call? Should we just go straight for that? No faffing around with anything else? So the next step. So we're now in step 5, low friction ask. So a high friction ask is give me 50 minutes of your time. When can we book? It's premature. It's like asking to meet a girl's parents on the first date. Let's slow down. So what does a low friction ask look like? So let me keep reading the email. So, but 5 minutes could get you 5% more customers. Now the next paragraph. We've invested some time reviewing your quote process. Yes, I study quote processes for a living. And we have an idea that can potentially increase the number of people that complete the quotes. We created this for you on the house. If you like it, let's talk. And then there's a link to the video. Another low friction ask. Does this look interesting? Another low friction ask. If you like it, I could send you more. Another low friction ask. Would an exchange via email make sense before you can decide if a broader conversation makes sense? Another low friction ask.
I'm assuming this doesn't sound interesting, right? Feel free to say no if you don't think this is a fit, but might we be able to help? Yes or no? These are all low friction asks. I am not a fan of a high friction ask in the beginning, which is get me a meeting, schedule 45 minutes.
How do I ask this? If you send that to the right person at the right time, of course, there's going to go, maybe it's even just a one-liner of, yes, tell me more, whatever it is. If we get the right person at the wrong time with the right messaging, it goes in an inbox, and especially someone like a CEO, they may have people managing the inbox, they may not, however they want to go about it. And so they go, I will get back to that, and it kind of fades and fades and fades and fades. How do we follow up on a message like this? And then we can assume that the follow-up worked and further down the kind of like the tunnel of success here. But what do we do when we don't get a reply after kind of 24 hours, 48 hours? What do we do then, Josh?
You're making a great point. So if you were to stand in front of a room full of 300 people and you said, raise your hand if you're buying a house right now, you'd probably have 4 or 5 people raise their hand. That's outbound. Most of the time when you're doing outbound and you reach out, what I call the motivation meter, right, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being, oh my God, now, 1 being 0, we're at a 1 or a 2. The problem is a problem, but it's not a big enough problem. So for instance, I have a barbecue. Only half of my barbecue works. It's a problem, but I'm only cooking for my wife and I.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. It's a problem, but it's a 2 on the scale of 1 to 5. It's in the blue zone, not in the red zone. But if my wife 4 days later or a week later said, we're cooking for 12 and I want you to grill, all of a sudden now I'm in the red zone. It's now a hot problem. And so it's not enough to have the problem. The problem has to be experiencing enough struggle. And sometimes, to your point, Will, the timing is off. So we need an approach to be able to go away. So let's actually talk about that. What I never do is send 7 emails with bumping things, because I'm going to assume that somebody's timing just isn't right because my outreach, I'm going to assume, was targeted and was a relevant problem. And if not, then shame on me too. So I'm going to assume if they don't get back to me, shame on me.
Yep.
So I will rarely send, contrary, like 15 touches, 20 touches. I think that annoys most people. And I'm friends with a couple CEOs that actually get those emails and they forward them to me and say curse words.
And just to pause on this for a second, this is incredibly important at this level, right? Because middle management, you might be able to spam a whole industry. There's 10 times more of them. It's going to take you 10 times longer to do it. Maybe when you're spamming these individuals, you're only actually contacting them once a year with a kind of a new campaign. Once you email a CEO who's been in the role for 20 years, is going to be in it for another 15, you've burnt it, right? That bridge to you, your organization, the brand, if they're annoyed, you're just done. Well, not necessarily completely done, but you're digging a hole that you've got to climb out of, haven't you?
It's a great point. We always talk about 4-5% response rates, but what about the 95 that are not responding, that you don't hear from? And I believe these 7, 8, 10 touch things that are rebumping, just getting this to your top of your inbox. And I've actually interviewed my customers that are C-level executives that bought because I wanted to hear their perspective, and all of them are pissed off about that. And so are a lot of, I would imagine, people that are not CEOs. Just like if I was hammering at you the same email and bumping it to the top of your Emacs, you would probably be annoyed. Anybody would be annoyed. And yet we do that to other people. So I'm a big fan that each touch that you give has to provide something very important, which makes someone smarter. Every time I communicate with someone, I want to make them smarter about something, a new idea that I have, and I want to communicate it in a way that makes them feel good. So with you, I did 4, 5, 6 times, but each time it was a different angle. It was a different attempt at humor. It was a different way to make you feel good. But it wasn't, did you get my email? Did you get my email? Did you get my email? It wasn't the same thing. You could probably help your companies in 3 or 4 or 5 different ways. Your product probably can help people in 3 or 4 or 5 different ways. Maybe you solve 4 or 5 different problems. And the idea here is to spread those out. And if you don't get a response on those 4 or 5 problems after 4 or 5 months, that's okay. Maybe your hypothesis was wrong, because we're not here to pitch. We're here to see if there's someone that needs help getting out of a car right now. And if they don't need help getting out of the car, that's okay. We could just go to someone else. The world's a big place, man. It's a big place. Where we get into trouble is we assume that everybody we're calling needs a new barbecue. And even though the problem is broken, so one more example is my grandma had a toaster. It was a shitty toaster, excuse the language. Only one side worked. It made light toast and it took forever. I would come over to her house all the time with a new toaster. She would never buy it. Why? Because she was making progress. She only made light toast. She wasn't in a rush. And she knew her toaster user interface. So as salespeople, we come in and like, clearly this toaster's better, but it's not better for grandma. She's doing fine. And we can't sell to someone that's making progress, even though our thing is a better toaster. That's where we get into trouble.
Well, just to, we'll wrap up this point with this, Josh, of you reached out to us. I'm pretty sure we didn't reply for a while. We just weren't recording. And when we don't record, it was a tiny team that we have here. The focus just goes on something else, the next project. So the next kind of 6 weeks, we'll probably do 50, 60 shows, and that'll get us through the next quarter or so. And we kind of bank them up and spread them out over time. It wasn't that I was, rejecting you. It wasn't even that you probably needed as many touch points as what you would, because you would have got to get on the show anyway with your first couple of emails. It was literally just the timing issue, and it's as simple as that, right?
That's a brilliant statement, and I think you're exactly right. Sometimes when you reach out to people, it's the house example, it's the barbecue example. So the timing is wrong, and sometimes we have to get better at not asking for problems. We have to get better at finding problems. Another quick story on this, Will, because I think you'll like this. I was trying to kill some time in a mall because my wife was shopping. I went into a store that sold sneakers. If the store associate said, "What brings you in today?" I would have said nothing. If she said, "Can I help you?" I would have said no, but she didn't say any of that. What she said is, "Have you ever had your running gait checked?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" Moments later, I'm on a treadmill. Moments later, she's recording it. And she says, "You have pronated feet. And if you're running those sneakers, when you do your marathon, you're going to get injured." And as an old Jewish man, that's the last thing I want. She found a problem. She didn't ask about a problem. And then she ended up selling me sneakers. So oftentimes, if we're not hearing back from someone, it could also be timing, but it could also be you're telling people things they already know. So stop asking about problems and start finding problems.
Love it. Well, with that, I'm conscious of time here, so I want to split this episode, if you're up for it, Josh, into a kind of part one and a part two. So just to wrap up, I assume you're cool with that.
Yeah, man, it's your show, buddy. I'm here to support.
I didn't want to go, yeah, we'll have a part two. And Josh is like, oh, he's a bit of a dickhead. We're not coming back on this show. All right, so with that in mind, Sales Nation, we'll split it into two parts. But just to wrap up this part then, what do we do We've got a reply. They've said, yes, I'm interested here. Because clearly we can't just do a little bit more of the project and send it over. Because if we do that, eventually we'll have done all the work and all the value has been handed over to the client and that there's nothing in it for us. There's been no transaction. So with that said, kind of to wrap up this part of the show, Josh, what do we do when we get that one liner saying, yes, interested?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So Tony nicely forwarded the email to a gentleman by the name of Jess Reed, who works underneath him. And Jess Reed said, Tony suggested that I get in touch with you. I'm copying my admin. And to make a very long story short, about 2 weeks later, myself, the founder, and the president were in a room with 15 Geico executives. I'll never forget it. We're a small digital agency. They opened the door and we are in a room with literally 15 executives staring us down saying, what do you guys talk? What is this thing? This looks really interesting. And that's how the relationship started. We ended up closing that business, but that's how it started. That's how we got the meeting eventually, and that turned into revenue.
Well, we'll start the next episode with you sat there with beads coming down your face, with 15 men and women in suits and power suits kind of staring opposite you, Josh. We'll start the next episode with that. But just to wrap things up, as you know, you're a listener of the show, we wrap it up with the same question every time, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Stop assuming that what you have is what people need. Because they could be your grandma, my grandma, right? Even though you have a thing that you think is the greatest thing, sliced bread, stop assuming someone has the struggle enough or the desire to want it right now at that time. Because when you bring that intent into the sales conversation, that energy can be felt, and you end up sounding like the mall kiosk person that wants to rub lotion on you.
You're very, you do this purposely. You're very visual in your descriptions, Josh. Is that something that you work on?
Thank you. I try my best for you. I have about 3 more, Will, for this show, then I'm tapped out.
Well, with that, I want you to tell us where we can find out more about you, Josh. I know you got an awesome resource. I actually really like the format of this, the Badass B2B Growth Guide. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So if you are a salesperson and you're trying to get conversations started with strangers and you want to know how to close those conversations into revenue, what I've done over the last 15 years is I've collected a series of plays that can be read in 2 minutes. Each play is on a separate page of a Google Doc. Unlike a Kindle book, I keep adding plays. And you can get access to this Google Doc by going to salesdna.co/badass. And every month or so, when I do something new that works, I add it in there. Unlike a Kindle book, you can copy and paste it and modify it. And also included is the psychology behind the tactic so that you can apply it to your business. There's absolutely no fluff. There's no forward. There's no setup. It's just starts with play 1. And I think now we are up to about 68 plays. There's cold call scripts. There's ways to diffuse objections, first touches that I've sent out, specific examples of first touches and replies, direct mail, all sorts of stuff like that. It's chock full of goodness.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to that in the show note to this episode over at salesman.org as well, Josh. And with that, mate, I appreciate your time, your insights on this, your very visual kind of anecdotes. And I look forward to doing part 2 with you, mate.
Part 2, I'm ready for it, buddy.
Josh.
I mean, Rocky had like 6. We could do 6 if you want. I'm good.
We'll do it, man. We'll do it. And with that, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Will.